If I actually talk to you about how many books I read in August, I'll be here for the rest of our lives. So let's condense it down a little bit. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife, and today I'm going to talk to you about some of the best and some of the worst books that I read in August of this year. August, I took part in the Amazing Readathon, which was run by Brie from Four Paws in a Book, and in that month I read almost 40 books. I think if I sat down and I talked to you about all 40 of them, I would be here for quite some time. So I feel like I'm going to save you some time, I'm going to save me a little bit of time, and instead we're just going to talk about some of the really, really great ones and some of the not so great ones. Let's already get started with one of my August highlights, and that was The Fake Boyfriend Fiasco by Talia Hibbert. I have read other Talia Hibbert books before and I've absolutely loved them, but this one was just another step up. This was a fake dating book. It was much more spicy than the Brown Sister series. And I already loved the spice level in that. I already loved how those scenes were written. So when I got to The Fake Boyfriend Fiasco, I somewhat knew what I was getting myself into, but I think I just had no idea just how good it was going to be. The Fake Boyfriend Fiasco, which was previously published under the name Sweet for the Greek or Sweet on the Greek, it follows Aria and Nick. Aria has gone through quite a traumatic experience in a previous book. This is the third book in a series. And she doesn't really trust men in the same way as she did beforehand. She's having a little bit of a confidence crisis. She's having just a little bit of a moment and she needs some time off for herself. And then there is Nick, who is Greek. He is a footballer and he is looking to actually kickstart a relationship for the first time. So when he and Aria meet in the hotel lobby one day, they decide to strike up a fake dating relationship together and things really start to escalate from there. As I said, I absolutely loved the spice level in this book. It was so well done. It was so well placed. It didn't feel gratuitous. It was really, really interesting. It was really great to see it. And also, the chemistry between Nick and Aria was just fantastic. I really loved watching them get to know each other, watching their relationship expand, watching them become more comfortable with each other. It was just such a fantastic thing to watch. It is, as I said, the third book in a series, and there were a couple of things that I feel like I had missed out. As I said, there is a traumatic experience that happens to Aria in a previous book, and it is slightly touched upon here, but I feel like I was missing a little bit of context. I feel like there were a couple of things that I probably would have done better knowing before the start of this book so that I could go into it with a little bit more context, just with a little bit more knowledge and understanding of the situation. Overall, it didn't impact it too much. There was just a couple of things that I wish I had known. What I also really loved here is how Greek Nick is. He constantly gives Aria pet names in Greek. He's constantly speaking Greek to her. And I really loved that. I love watching when characters' backgrounds, heritages, nationalities, I love watching when that is actually a big part of their story, when you can tell that it's a big part of who they are. Also, I feel like Nick is one of my favorite book boyfriends at the moment. He might be up there on the same level as Zaf Ansari from Take a Hint, Danny Brown. Brie and I have actually had a discussion a couple of times as to whether or not we prefer Nick or whether or not we prefer Zaf. And we think that the only reason we can edge out Zaf in this instance is that while they're both sports players with different sports, Zaf is a rugby player, Nick is a soccer player, Zaf also reads romance novels, so you know he's got like that ground knowledge, whereas there's no mention of Nick doing that. However, that does not mean that Nick seems to be bad in bed. Overall, this was such a fantastic book. I am so glad that Brie introduced this to me. I am so glad that the two of us sat down and sort of tandem read it rather than straight up buddy read it together. I had such a great time with this book. I'll maybe go and check out the other two books in the series, have a little bit more of a background knowledge of these characters, and I think I'm going to have a great time with it. Then let's talk about one that did not set my world on fire as much, and that is Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood. This is actually the book that made me realize that maybe Ali and I need to go our separate ways. This one follows Elsie and Jack. Elsie is a theoretical physicist, but also moonlights as a kind of a fake girlfriend. She can be brought to weddings or to social events or to anything where you feel like you need to have a partner by your side. She can be brought in for hire and will just basically be the perfect girlfriend for the night. One of Elsie's clients is actually the brother of Jack, who is another professor working at a university to where she has already applied to get a fellowship. And they instantly butt heads as soon as Jack finds this out, because he feels like she is just taking advantage of his brother. She is making him out to be a fool. She is just trying to take his money from him. And I feel like this is a formula I've just seen too many times from Ali Hazelwood. I feel like I could almost write an Ali Hazelwood book myself with my eyes closed. There was, again, so much reference to Jack being like 9,000 foot tall and Elsie being maybe about 5 inches in height. And the animosity between Jack and Elsie, I feel like we didn't really need to have it. There didn't really seem to be any kind of basis towards it. There didn't seem to be any kind of a real reason for it. And I felt like it was kind of swept under the carpet as well. We didn't really get a whole reason as to why. It didn't really come to a conclusion. And it almost had the feeling of he hates everyone but her, but refuses to show her that he doesn't hate her. I just felt like it was such a clunky, strangely written book. I also had some trouble with one of the sex scenes in the book. I felt like that was written in such an awkward way. I feel like it just didn't work. It didn't flow well. It didn't seem like the kind of sex scene that I had usually enjoyed from Ali Hazelwood. There wasn't a whole lot about this book for me to love. I feel like I've read every Ali Hazelwood book that's out there, and I feel like I've read the same book just with different covers and with different names and with different characters in it. So now it just seems like this is probably the time to say goodbye to her. Next up is another highlight, but this feels like a little bit cheating to say that this is my book of the month, mainly because it was a reread. But there was just nothing that could topple it. There was nothing that was better than it, and that is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I was a little bit apprehensive going into this book. It is one that I had read first in 2019, and I sped through it. I pretty much shut out the entire world just to get this read. And I was really apprehensive about going into a possible reread about this, because I just thought, what if I don't enjoy it as much this time? What if it's a totally different book to the one that I have in my head? What if it feels like a totally different book to what's in my head right now? Luckily, I had absolutely nothing to worry about. Evelyn Hugo was just as vibrant as the first time that I had met her. Evelyn Hugo was just as kind of cryptic and confusing and confounding as I had first met her. And I found that even now, I was going back and I was learning more things and I was picking up on things that I didn't notice the first time. But it was such an enjoyable read. I had such a great time hearing Evelyn's story about the 7 husbands that she had had throughout her life, who her real true love was, and about the connection with Monique, who was the journalist who had been sent to kind of cover Evelyn's life story and write a kind of an almost expose tell-all about Evelyn towards the end of her career, and telling all about these 7 husbands that she had never spoken about before. I do know quite a few kind of criticisms about Evelyn Hugo as a character, as a book. I do know a couple of criticisms about the writing, especially when it is an author of color writing about a Latino character, but it is still my favorite book of all time. It hasn't been toppled off the perch, and I think that the second time of reading it actually just made me love it a little bit more. Then back to one of the lowlights, and this was Exes and Ohs by Amy Lee. I had a NetGalley copy of this with ages, and I meant to keep reading it and then just never picked it up until it fit one of the prompts. And this one just didn't work for me, as well as other books that I had read this month. It follows Tara, who is a kind of a romance reading influencer on TikTok, on Instagram. She does a couple of live shows with her grandmother every now and then, which were enjoyable to see. It was really nice to see her connecting with her grandmother and talking about their relationships and about the tropes that they really enjoyed reading and whether or not that had fit into their real lives. But Tara is approaching her 30s and has noticed that she's never been in a realistic relationship, that she is kind of running out of time. So she makes a list of 10 of her exes that she's going to go back to and try and rekindle the romance and see if anything can be made out of that. At the same time as she's doing this, she moves in with a guy called Trevor, who is a friend of the boyfriend of her sister, who had been the couple from the previous book. And I felt like their connection didn't really work. They didn't really seem to have any chemistry. They just seemed to hate each other and then instantly falling in love with each other. I really would have liked this book to have been a dual POV so that we could learn a little bit more about Trevor's point of view. We could see a little bit more of his thought process, what he really thought about Tara. There were a couple of things that I just would have loved to have seen his perspective on. I think the main thing that didn't work for me in this whole book was that list of exes that Tara was keeping track of and getting back in touch with. There were a couple of things about this whole thing that just overall fell really flat. But I think that the first and most important one is that she kept using these people's real names, real locations, real jobs, everything about them. She didn't give any of them like a pseudonym or give them like just a general location in her life. It felt really intrusive when she was talking about these people online to her thousands of followers and saying their actual names, their actual locations, their actual situations in life. It was dangerous. It was never going to work out. In the real world, I think something like this would be completely uncalled for. It would be so looked down upon. And I really wish that it had gotten a little bit of kickback in the book. I really wish that somebody had seen this list and talked to her about it, or kind of made a comment to her that, hey, these seem to be these people's real names, maybe let's not do that part of it. A lot of Tara's actions as well are very kind of stage 5 clinger, and I did not enjoy reading that. I really didn't enjoy Tara as a character. I felt like she was kind of written as a caricature of a woman of her age, and I didn't find any kind of redeeming qualities of this book. There was nothing that really warmed me to it. I have got a copy of the setup, and I know that Brie has already DNF'd this one because there were a couple of things in it that she didn't love, and I don't think it's one I'm going to go into either. And the final highlight for me that I'm going to speak to you about was Rich People Problems by Kevin Kwan. This is the third and final book in the Crazy Rich Asian series, and I feel like this was a really strong one to end it on. I absolutely love these books set in Singapore. I've been to Singapore once. I was about 12 or 13 when I went there. And it's a really great way to kind of rediscover the city and see the things that I can vaguely remember, the foods that I remember eating, the places that I kind of remember being at. I also really love the footnotes that you get in every single chapter about the Singlish, as in the mixes of Singaporean and English, the kind of slang that is used, some of the Hokkien or the Malay or the Tamil that is being spoken across the country. I absolutely adore these books. They're such a kind of cultural opening for me. I'm not very familiar with Singaporean culture or Southeast Asian culture as a whole, so reading these books is such a great way to experience it. But this book does also end the series on a little bit of a downer, because it is in this book that Nick Young's grandmother, Ama, passes away. And that was written so beautifully. You can see the family really coming together, supporting each other in their own way, dealing with her death in their own way. And you can kind of see cracks beginning to be repaired between Nick and his family, especially between Nick and his mother. He gets to reunite with his grandmother as well, whom he hasn't really spoken to since the news of his and Rachel's relationship and their marriage in the second book. I do feel, however, in this book, you get to see the kind of difference between Ama and between her family, and the materialism that her family have gone, and their kind of want to show off their wealth. Whereas you can tell that Ama was a much simpler woman. She enjoyed the simpler things in life. She had a much simpler background and upbringing. I also loved the flashbacks that we get to her childhood, to her teenage years during one of the world wars. It was so interesting to see this book from her perspective, to actually read about her life a little bit more. I feel like we got to know more about her as a character. We get to know more about her as a person. The relationship between Oscar and Charlie also heavily features in this book. And I feel like this was a really well done part of the book. You can see that their relationship is very much in its early stages. They are very much just kind of figuring out how things are going to work for them, especially when they both come from such high power families in Singapore. And the gossip mill doesn't exactly leave them alone for the entire time. There is also the situation that Charlie is basically still in separation from his wife, And with two young daughters, their family life and their home life is a little bit tumultuous at times. I enjoyed this book so much. I enjoyed this aspect of the book in particular. I thought it was a great way of seeing what a second relationship is like after a divorce, especially when there are children involved and you have to think about them as well. Overall, it was probably my favorite book of the entire series, and it's definitely one I would go back and reread. To balance it out, the final low light of the month that I'm going to talk to you about was The Mysterious Case of the Alperton Angels by Janice Hallett. I had such high hopes going into this. I think the hopes were maybe a little bit too high. This book follows Amanda and Oliver, who are two authors that are trying to write a book about the Alperton Angels. They were part of a cult in the 1990s where two young people, aged around 17, had given birth to a baby that they had been convinced was the Antichrist. These two young people have now gone into kind of witness protection situation, so it's very difficult to find them. But nobody knows what happened to the baby. Nobody has heard anything about the baby. Nobody knows where it is. But their 18th birthday is approaching. And Amanda and Oliver now want to get to the bottom of this case. They want to find out where the baby is, if it has been adopted out, if it is living a completely different life, if it even knows about the start that it had in life. I will admit that part of the reason I didn't enjoy this book is how wholly unlikable Amanda and Oliver are. I really did not enjoy reading either of their points of view. I felt like their constant battle to one-up each other, there was so much about it that just genuinely did not work for me. There were so many of their actions that I really had to call into question. There were a couple of really pushy things that both of them had done, really underhanded things that both of them had done, that I just had to kind of sit back and think, these are not the people that I want to read. These are not really the people for me. There were, however, a couple of things that did intrigue me about the book, and it did force me to keep going just to find out why things had kept happening to people that Amanda was talking to, why Oliver really needed to know about this instance in particular, why he had this contact that Amanda could never get in touch with, why it was so easy for Oliver to get it. I will admit that by the time I got to the ending, I didn't particularly care about what the ending was. I just wanted to get there and I wanted to get the book finished. But when I did find out what the ending was and when I did find out what the twist was, it just didn't work for me. I found it a little bit kind of almost too predictable by the time that we had gotten there. It was just the hype that killed this book for me a little bit too much. I know a load of people out there who have absolutely loved it, but because of how much I loved the appeal and because of the really high pedestal that I put the appeal on, it was actually my book of the year in 2022. So when I knew that Janice Hallett had other books coming out and they were written in a similar format and they were done in the same kind of formula, I feel like maybe I was giving it a little bit too much hype. Maybe I was overselling the book to myself. So by the time that I got to the end of it, I just didn't particularly care anymore. And there was nothing really about these characters that would have won me back over them anyway. So it just did not work out for me. Those are some of the highlights and the lowlights that I had across August in 2023. Even though I had one of the best months in my reading life in terms of the quantity, quality didn't always match up. Did you have a particularly good August in terms of your reading, or did you have a little bit of a reading slump in the month? If you'd love to leave me a comment but you can't think of anything you'd like to say, then just leave me the thumbs up or the thumbs down emoji. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.